Good. Okay, everybody cross their fingers. The technology appears to be working. Yes. Thank you for coming back to join us this evening again. Hopefully things will go a little bit more smoothly than they did last month, but you know, in the world of tech, one never knows. Tonight's Rise in Progress is going to be in 3 pieces. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about the Superintendent of Public Instruction and his role in Michigan government here. Then we're going to go up on the ramp. We're going to visit the case where we mocked up a Capitol office that is currently dressed to look like this suite. And then we are going to go up to the ground floor, and we are actually, or excuse me, to the first floor. I have to go by ground, of course, to get there. And we will actually visit the suite itself. So when we leave this room later on, if you can take everything with you, that would be most appreciated. And I will try to remember to say this when we get upstairs again, but same rules are going to apply as when we did our last office tour. So we're going to ask that you not take any photographs when we go into the office suite, because this is a working office and we just want to be respectful of that space. So just to give you that very, very, very quick reminder, which I know you've all seen this slide a million times by now and probably don't need it anymore. We are going to be talking largely about Michigan's 3rd Capitol tonight. That is, of course, the building that, in a broader sense, we are in this evening. This building opens officially on January 1st of 1879. And as you have heard me say before, remember back in those days, it was not just a legislative building where the governor had one of her offices. This was home to all of state government. And here we can see one of our original floor plans in which Elijah Myers, our architect, working with Alan Boers and the Capitol Building Commission, they would kind of evolve into the entity that would take care of the building once it opened. Here you can see their initial plan for who is going to go where. So that first floor is going to be home to the different departments that exist at this time. Except because what fun is it to be consistent? What we actually plan about 1872, 1873, and what comes to fruition are 2 different things. So we are going to be talking about the west wing of the building today. That's the back wing. But if you look carefully at these plans, and I know the text is a little bit blurry, that's because if we throw the actual giant TIFF in here, you could hear the gears in my laptop grinding. So we're going to actually be visiting what is the north side of that west wing, even though if you could read this, the office is actually identified as being on the south side of that west wing. So this was one of the spaces that changed, and we don't know why. If I had to give you a 1-word answer, I would say politics. Now, what iteration those politics took, I can't tell you. I can't tell you if there was a superintendent who was really good friends with Boers who said, I want that window and that view, or if it just happened somewhere along the way. Maybe the Capitol Building Commission made the decision and the superintendent had nothing to do with it. We know in part where they end up because in 1879, they have to publish a directory to the new building so people visiting us can find their way around. And that directory, which Alan Boers compiles and prints, he serves as the first superintendent of the Capitol. That directory, which you'll see here, lays out the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office as being in that northwest corner of the building. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Cam, and she will talk about what said superintendent actually did.
Yes, so before we dive into really what the superintendent does, I just want to give a little bit of background on education in Michigan. So education in Michigan dates back to before Michigan was Michigan. In the Northwest Ordinance, which outlines how the Northwest Territory, the area that would eventually become Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan, are to be ruled and are to be established, that provides some information on what we should be doing with schooling in there. In the Northwest Ordinance, says schools and the means of education shall be forever encouraged. So When we sit down to write our very first Constitution, there is a whole section, it's Article 10 of the Constitution of 1835, that outlines what we're going to do about education in the state of Michigan. And the first thing it does is it establishes a superintendent of public instruction appointed by the governor to a 2-year term. Now, this is a little bit unusual at the time. We are not the first state to have a superintendent of public instruction. We are, however, the first state to have a superintendent of public instruction designated as a constitutional office. What this means is a lot of other states will go forward and they'll start doing things like combining the role of superintendent of public instruction with the role of secretary of state and putting all of that under their secretary of state. A lot of states that do have a superintendent of public instruction, the office goes away, but because it's in our Constitution, it's much harder to do that. This article will also outline that there's supposed to be a perpetual fund for the support of schools, that there should be a common school system with schools that are held at least 3 months out of the year in each district. It establishes libraries and says that there should be one in each township as soon as circumstances will permit. It's gonna take a while for circumstances to permit. And then it establishes a university fund that'll eventually, that's where the University of Michigan comes in as the university, is through funding of that's outlined in our Constitution. Now, our first superintendent of public instruction is going to be John Pierce. Now, he is considered the father of education in Michigan. He is very involved right from the ground floor. He's involved with the Constitution of 1835, but then as superintendent of public instruction, he's going to actually advise the legislator on all of the different policies that should be implemented in order to actually carry out the requirements of that first Constitution. So a little bit about John Pierce. He was born in New Hampshire in 1797. He was largely self-taught, attended Brown University, and he actually worked as a teacher while he was in college in order to fund his own education. He then goes to Princeton, where he graduates with a theology degree and becomes a congregational minister. He becomes a missionary and circuit minister in Michigan. That's what brings him here to the Marshall area. Again, first superintendent of public instruction. After that, he's actually in the Michigan House of Representatives in 1847. He's a delegate to the 1850 Constitutional Convention. So when we revise our Constitution, he's going to be involved with the education in that subsequent Constitution. And he actually also served as the speaker for the and delivered the opening address of the state normal school in 1852. Normal schools were schools for teachers, and we'll talk more about normal schools in just a little bit. Now, with the office of superintendent of public instruction, there is quite a few different responsibilities, and these responsibilities change quite a bit over time. So when John Pierce was superintendent of public instruction, one of his main duties was he had charge of all the school and university land selling and investing money. So the way we're funding schools is actually through the sale of land. And so he was responsible for actually holding different auctions and selling the land and taking that money into the primary school fund or the university school fund and making sure that this was all managed, that the lands were getting good prices in order to benefit the school system. Superintendents are responsible for dispersing money to individual districts, making recommendations on legislation related to education, informing districts of new legislation and educational best practices. They are required to write an annual report that's given to the executive and legislator. They get involved in later eras with architecture and hygiene recommendations for schools. At one point, there's literally, you can write to the superintendent of public instruction's office as a school district and say, we need a one-room school building. And they'll say, here are your 3 options. Pick from these. They are free. Take them to your local builder. Or we need a 2-room schoolhouse with 2 separate coat rooms. Here's your options for that. So they're getting involved in things like that. They're getting involved in things like where a furnace in a school should be placed to keep different fumes from affecting the students, and where windows should be placed within a classroom so that the light shines on the desk in the best way to promote education. It gets into the nitty-gritty at points. They're involved with licensing teachers and then also auditing schools. And that's just kind of a general overview. Some of those responsibilities, as I mentioned, will come and go. So I mentioned a little bit about funding education, and I kind of want to get a little bit more into this. because as I mentioned, it is through mainly land. So these are land grants. I've got a list here of major land grants that were given to the state prior to 1879. So when Michigan becomes a state, over 1 million acres is given by the federal government to the state to be sold, and then that money will go to the primary school fund. That's going to be your common schools, think grade schools at this point in time. There was 72 sections of land granted to the state for higher education, and these were actually reserved for higher education under that Northwest Ordinance in 1826. And so this land was acquired from Native peoples and turned over to the state by the federal government upon achieving statehood. But what it also meant is that was some of the best farmland in the area and could get some high prices because it had been reserved for so long before Michigan even achieved statehood. There was 72 sections of Salt Spring and adjacent lands. These had a rule that they could not be sold. They were actually to be leased. So salt springs are very important. This is how you actually get salt. Salt in this area is very important for preserving things. We don't have refrigeration. And so Salt Springs, by leasing the land to salt companies and getting an annual fee rather than selling the land outright, the state was actually getting more money. This is why they say Salt Springs could only be leased. That money is used to fund the normal school, again, the school, which is the School for Education, the Michigan Asylum in Kalamazoo, and the State Agricultural College, which will become MSU. Swamplands are granted to the state in 1850. 50% of the funds from the sale of those lands were to go to the primary school fund. Some was to the agricultural fund, and then there was a portion that I have not yet figured out what fund it was supposed to go to. And then under the Morrill Act in 1862, an additional 240,000 acres was granted to the state to fund an agricultural college. So you can see a lot of this is just through the sale of land that we're getting the basis for a lot of these funds. Now, when we talk higher education, this was initially envisioned as the university with a branch system. So again, University of Michigan, and then the branch system was that in different areas of the state, there would be branch departments that would have a female department, an agricultural department, a teacher training department, and a department to prepare men to actually go to the university. So in kind of modern ideas about education, these are actually more comparable to high schools than they are to the colleges we have today, the other state institutions. 25 towns applied for a branch, 16 were authorized, only 9 were ever built, and most of those were actually private academies that decided to become a state branch, and then when the branch system fell apart, they decided they wanted to be a private academy again. And the reason that this system fell apart is that money was going from the university fund to fund the branches, and the University of Michigan did not like all of that money being diverted. And in 1846, they convinced the legislature to quash that. So they were kind of on their own and got all of their funding back. As we continue through this evening and as we move through the building, I'm going to provide what I'm calling snapshots on education. So 1840, snapshot on education. There are 2,300 school districts in the state of Michigan. And when you say, whoa, that is a very large number, this is because in the way that education is envisioned in the 1840s, each school was its own school district. They were overseen by a board of inspectors that was 3 people from the community. And the board of inspectors was responsible for hiring a teacher that they thought met the qualifications to be a teacher. So each school is its own district. And so we have about 51,000 students. Major issues in the 1840s was how to actually improve on those statistics. So those might be a little bit off because a lot of school districts are not actually returning statistics. They want more uniformity in textbooks because another issue they're having is each student, each child, if they can afford it, is just bringing whatever book they can get their hands on. So the teacher walks in and there's like 20 different books in the school. There's, everybody has a different version or a different book altogether. And the teachers are trying to teach based off just what kids bring. And then there's talk that there was very little money that has been raised to actually establish any libraries. So we get some major changes in 1840. In 1842, the state land office takes over responsibility for those school lands. So that is no longer a responsibility of the superintendent of public instruction. In 1843, they started allowing what they call union school districts. That means that, so in the initial constitution, each school is its own district, but that's with each township has its own system. So if you had a city that had more than one township within its borders, you had to have multiple school districts in that city. Union school districts allow one city to have one school district within its own borders. In 1843, there is the rate tax bill, which is not a benefit to education. What that meant was that schools are funded through the land and also through taxes. Now, if a district expended all of the taxes they collected from the residents before the end of the school year, they would then charge the parents and guardians of the school, of the students attending the school based on their attendance. So what would happen is school district spends all of its money in the first month or two, they start taxing the parents, but because it's expensive, the kids that have less money, they just stop going to school, which means those that remain, now it's more money. And so then the next least wealthy people, they stop attending, and it's just a big cycle of schools ending early all the time for lack of money. And then in 1846, we get our first teacher training institute, which is kind of like a conference, a teacher's conference, and that was held in Jackson. If we jump forward to 1850s, we get that new Constitution of 1850. It changes the Superintendent of Public Instruction from an appointed position to an elected position. We get the first normal school established in Ypsilanti in 1852. That's going to be Eastern Michigan. Organization of the State Teachers Association. There's also in 1859 a law that says any school district with more than 200 students can establish a high school that would be paid for by taxes. This was actually kind of controversial. In 1873, citizens from Kalamazoo filed a lawsuit. The Supreme Court, though, said no. They were arguing that that only primary schools should be funded through taxpayer money, that high schools should not, and they lose that court case. The unanimous opinion was penned by Thomas Cooley. It set a precedent in Michigan, but also a lot of other states took notice. So this actually furthered high school education throughout the country. In 1859, districts with more than 100 people can organize as graded schools. Graded schools means once you get a certain number of students, you have more than one classroom, and certain grades, certain ages are in separate classrooms. So instead of everybody all in one classroom, you can have, kindergarten through second grade in one classroom and third through sixth in another, things like that. And then townships can also divide libraries into district libraries. You don't just get one township library. You can have multiple ones to be closer to the people and spread your funding out throughout the township. By the 1860s, we're up to 4,094 school districts. And we have increased the amount of attendance in school. We're no longer saying, okay, you have to be in school 3 months out of the year. Now we're saying, now most people are attending school if they attend about 6.2 months out of the year. Major issues are the need to establish more teacher training courses. And then again, instead of saying that you could have graded schools, we're saying you should have graded schools. And then there was a lot of discussion about different tax rates and potential changes in tax funding structures, and we get the publication of an educational journal. By the 60s, we get a state board of education. They become responsible for creating a list of approved books for schools and libraries. So you can actually see in the Superintendent of Public Instruction report from 1860, the list of approved textbooks for schools. We have in 1867, the Superintendent of Public Instruction is actually able to issue teaching certificates. Prior to this point in time, it would have been these local school inspectors that would have said, okay, you can teach here. Or it would have been more of a county level thing, not something that was a statewide thing. And then in 1869, we get a law that public schools are free of cost to all pupils. This is important, that word all, because it's actually in response to a school district who tried to exclude an African-American student. And then, so that word all was very important. By 1870s, we get compulsory education for the first time. So students 8 to 18 years old must attend 12 weeks of school a year. In 1871, we outlaw segregated schools. So not only do all schools have to have, all students have to be able to get an education, but they are in integrated schools. In 1873, there's limitations to taxation imposed. So each district can only tax a certain number of mills to their residents to raise the money. We get some more institutions like the State Public School for Dependent Children. And then the State Board of Education by 1879 can hold teacher training exams and grant teacher certificates. Now, with that, that's kind of brings us up to the time that this building opens, which also means this is the time we're going to start walking around, leaving this room here, and take a look at those other areas. So those of you who are joining us today on our live stream, in the description, there will be a link to a second video. We have pre-recorded the second part of the program tonight. So if you want to catch the rest of the program, please click on that link and watch the rest of what everyone else is going to see in person. With that, we're going to head out and head up to the exhibit case.